just take a moment to allow your eyes to close and allow yourself to begin to relax. And as you begin to relax, I'm just going to tell this sleep meditation in the background. And while I tell this sleep meditation, you can just take a moment to begin to drift off asleep. And I don't know whether you'll drift asleep faster to the sound of my words or to the spaces between my words. And you can have a sense of a woman waking up in a hotel. And she's in that state between sleep and wakefulness, where she feels so incredibly comfortable. She's got the thickest, most comfortable duvet cover wrapped around her, wrapped up under her chin. Her arm tucked into it, pulling it around, resting her head deeply into the comfortable pillow. Feeling almost like she's resting in a nest so comfortably, so deeply, almost like wrapping a cloud around her. And she can feel a slight coolness in the room on her cheeks. From the window in the hotel being open, she can hear the sounds of birds outside singing. She can notice the light from the morning sun shining onto the curtains, gently illuminating the room, and the slight feeling of that on her eyelids. And her mind is still somewhere between sleep and wakefulness, occasionally drifting into pleasant dreams, before drifting back to being aware of the birds outside, the feeling of the duvet wrapped around her, and then drifting back in to those dreams. And for a little while, and she's unaware of quite how long, she drifts backwards and forwards between wakefulness and sleep, just feeling so deeply comfortable and relaxed. And then after a while, she fully awakens, gets out of the bed. She makes herself a drink. She wraps a warm dressing gown around her. She opens the curtains, breathes in some of that fresh, cool air from outside. Can really notice the sun on her face, while she drinks a warm drink. She then heads down for breakfast and finds her attention drifting around the different people, trying to work out the stories of the different people, looking at couples, at families, at people on their own, trying to work out the story of each of those other customers, looking at what different people are choosing to eat. And she's here alone, and so that gives her plenty of time to just observe others. She doesn't have to engage in any conversation. She can just take her time to enjoy breakfast while observing others. And then after breakfast, she heads off out of the hotel, walks down the street. She turns down an alleyway, and then down another alleyway. And there's no one else around down these alleyways. And so she notices how peaceful and quiet it is, just hearing her footsteps. And then she arrives at the back of an old building. And she climbs over a short wall into the back garden of the old building, walks through tall grass of this garden which hasn't been mown or tended to for probably many decades. She pushes through shrubs, vines, squeezes under trees, all the way to the back wall of this old building. And the windows are boarded over. So she carefully prizes open one of those windows, climbs in through that window, and can hear the crunching of her shoes on broken glass as she steps down onto the floor. Can notice shards of light squeezing through cracks in the boarded up windows, illuminating dust floating inside the building, and noticing that her movements are churning up more of that dust that floats around, glinting and glistening in those shards of light. And she gets out a torch, turns on that torch, and begins to explore this old building. She notices there's a certain atmosphere here, almost like there's a weight to the atmosphere, a certain stillness to the air, as if this air hasn't moved for a long time until she was here. And she explores the ground floor before heading upstairs, creaking her way up those stairs and exploring the upstairs rooms. And she sees herself in a mirror in one room, and for just a moment is startled before realizing it's just a mirror. And she heads to another room, and she sees on a shelf a prism, and as her torch passes that prism, so the light bends and turns into the most beautiful rainbow of colours, shining up onto the wall. And as she walks towards it, so those rainbow colours expand up that wall higher and higher. And some of the glow from the colours illuminates a little bit more of the room. And she picks up that prism and she carries it over to one of the beams of light shining in through one of the boarded up windows. And she places that down on the floor in line with the beam of light, reflecting that rainbow colour up towards a mirror above a mantelpiece, as it then reflects around the room illuminating this room with different rainbow colours, that as she walks through it, she can notice those different colours. And she walks through to another room, where she finds a stack of boxes up against one wall. And she takes down those boxes. She takes the top box, opens it. Some of the dust tickles her nose slightly. She then fingers her way through the documents that are in that box and doesn't see what she's looking for. She puts the lid back on and puts that aside and gets the next box, and then the next box and the next box. And all the first boxes that she checks just have documents in them, just paperwork, likely of the previous owners. And then she starts working down to boxes that have books in them and other items. And so she starts working through. She looks at some of the books. She looks through at some of the different items. And she finds an unusual looking book. And she opens that book and discovers that the middle of the book has had the pages cut out, making a gap so that from the outside it just looks like a book. But on the inside in the gap, she finds a golden key. And she looks at that golden key and is surprised at how golden the key looks, given how everything else seems to have aged and become dusty with time. And yet that golden key looks as pristine as she imagined it would have looked when it was created. And that the way it looks, she'd have no idea when it was created. And it wasn't a modern key. And so she takes the key, puts that in a pocket, closes that book, and carries on searching. And she finds another book that turns out to be a book that she feels will help her in what she's doing. She puts that book into a backpack and continues searching. And she can't find what the key is to in here. She finds that she's been through most of these boxes, but she's sure that what she's looking for must be here somewhere. If only she could figure out where. And so she decides to place all those boxes out on the floor in this room. And she places them in a grid on the floor. She then gets a piece of blue tack from her bag, breaks off a piece of cotton from her clothes. She rolls that blue tack into a ball around the bottom of that thread of cotton. She then goes and stands over the first box, and she says to herself, "Give me a sign for neutral." And as she says that, looking at the pendulum, it begins to swing around anti-clockwise. She then says, "Give me a sign for yes." And a moment later, the pendulum begins swinging backwards and forwards. She then thanks that and says, "Give me a sign for no." And gradually that pendulum starts swinging around a little bit before swinging left and right. She then says, "Go back to neutral." And the pendulum begins swinging around in a circle again. And then she says, "Is what I'm looking for in this box?" And she waits and watches. And the pendulum answers no. And she moves over to the next box. She asks the pendulum to swing neutrally again and thanks it when it does. And then says, "Is what I'm looking for in this box?" And after a few moments, the pendulum signals no. And she works her way through the boxes, holding that pendulum above each box, asking if what she's looking for is in that box. And when she's nearly at the end of all the boxes, she asks, and the pendulum signals yes. And so she opens that box. And she recognises the stuff that's in the box, having looked at it not that long ago. And so she begins to search, wondering what it is that's in this box that she's looking for. And she takes everything out of that box, places it on the floor, and she holds the pendulum over each item, asking, "Is this what I'm looking for?" Until eventually the pendulum says yes. And what it says yes over is a book. And on the front cover of that book is the most beautiful, almost carved looking weeping willow tree. And she feels that with her fingertips, the way that's almost carved or embossed into that leather-bound old book. And she opens the book, and she can feel that rough paper of that old book. She sees the date on that old book of 1736. She feels the page with her fingertips and can feel the letters and the designs printed into the page. And she can smell the smell of that old book. And she feels how delicate the book is as she carefully turns the pages, and does so carefully so as not to accidentally crack the spine or do any damage to the book. And she tries really hard to read the writing in the book, and she understands some of it, and other bits are words that she's unsure of. So she just keeps reading to get the gist of the book. And she notices the way that some letters in the book are being used for different letters that you'd use nowadays, and that the spelling isn't quite what you would use now. And she goes through that book, wondering if this is the book. And she can get the gist that there are some elements in this book about plants that are ideal for healing. She notices that there are potions. There are different magical rituals in the book. But she keeps looking through for what she's after. But she's aware this is definitely the right book. And that her mind obviously had recognised that when she went through everything, even though consciously she had overlooked it. That something about the cover, perhaps the age of the book, the design of the book, had registered non-consciously. She just needed to allow that part of her to communicate and let her know what it was. And so she carried on, just sat on the floor looking through that book, carefully turning those pages, until she found the chapter that she was after. And this chapter was about a local spring, a spring that apparently has healing water, and there's a cave near the spring, and she knows this is what she's searching for, so she takes up that book and she begins to place those boxes back where she found them, leaving everything as she found it. She puts that prism back where she found it. She finds her way back out of the building, heads out through the garden, back over the wall, works her way through the alleyways, only this time turning a different direction, heading away from the hotel she's staying in, and instead heading out to other streets. And she follows those streets and goes to a park, and she sits on a bench in the park and breathing the fresh air out here after being in that house. She gets that book out again, and this time as she goes through the book, she takes notes on a notepad, carefully writing down notes that she feels are relevant to what she's doing. She writes down all the clues to the location in the woodland. And after doing that, she starts making her journey there. And it isn't that far outside of the town, so she goes on foot. And she turns off into the woodland. And the air's crisp and cool, and she can hear the rustling of the leaves overhead. She can hear the sounds of birds and other animals among the trees, and the crunching of her feet with each step. And she follows her notes through this woodland until she begins to hear a bubbling, trickling sound of a stream. And she heads to that stream and follows that stream upstream, heading towards the spring. And after a few hours of walking, she finds that spring. The spring just looks very unassuming. Just a tiny spring bubbling away, that water trickling downstream. And she gets some of that water. And she gets out some equipment from her bag, and she tests the water. And everything seems that this is perfectly fine to drink. there seems to be nothing strange about it. And she drinks some of that water, and there seems to be nothing strange to the taste of it, and she doesn't notice any unusual effects. And she wonders where the cave is near here. So she looks around. She can't see signs of a cave. And she starts to walk around. And she can't find where the cave is. So she goes back to the stream. And she puts her hands into the water. And she can feel the bubbling of that water around her hands, and the coolness of that water. And she notices that the water is bubbling through, slightly offset to the bottom, almost like it's coming through the back side of this area. And as she rests her hand there, she notices something unusual. It's almost like there's a bit of a handle where that water's coming through. She puts her fingertips in to that gap that the water's coming through. Gets her fingertips onto the thing that feels like either a root or perhaps a handle, and she pulls on it. And as she does, the whole ground begins to rumble. And she can see the leaves on the ground and the mud on the ground beginning to dance and bounce around. And then she notices an area where the ground is beginning to fall away and sink down. And she sees that steps are forming, and she can hear the grinding of the ground as a stairway down near this spring opens up. She stands up, waits for the sound of those stairs to finish, waits for those stairs to stop. She puts her bag on her back and gets her torch and descends those stairs. And once she's descended the stairs, she turns that torch on and enters a dark corridor, a dark underground cave. And she shines that torch around the walls. It looks like no one's been here for a very, very long time. And she works her way around the corridor, descends more steps, follows another corridor with her footsteps echoing down each corridor, the slight whistling of wind down the corridor, and she can just about feel that breeze on her face. And then descending another set of steps into another corridor. And she has to pinch her nose and swallow just to equalize the air in her ears, as she then descends some more steps into another corridor, where she ends up finding herself at the most beautiful silver door. And on the silver door, she can see the crack straight down the centre where the door obviously parts. And across the centre is a circular golden seal. And in the centre of that golden seal is a keyhole. And she gets that key, puts it into the keyhole, and And then she can hear some cogs as that circular seal moves aside and the doors slowly swing open. And as those doors slowly swing open, so in an instant, flames light around the walls of this chamber, flickering to life, with the flickering light bouncing and dancing around the chamber, reflecting off of golden walls and a silver ceiling. And as she walks in, she notices that the floor also appears to be silver. And in the centre of this chamber, she notices there's just a single plinth, that the entire chamber is empty apart from that plinth. And on the plinth is a bottle. And that bottle looks like an old glass bottle, an old green glass bottle. And this is something that she's been hunting for. And so she takes that bottle, picks it up off of that plinth, places it down on the ground, sits herself down on the ground, and with her torch she reads through a bit more of the book, just skim reading big chunks of it to find the bit about where she is now. And she reads about this area, but notices that the passage on this area seems to just end without saying the outcome of getting this bottle. It just tells her where it is. And then the next chapter talks about something completely different. And she decides to open the bottle. She doesn't know exactly what to expect. She was just told that the legends are that all your worldly wishes are contained within this bottle. And she's always wondered whether that means that there's a treasure map in there, or some other treasure that can allow her to get whatever she wants, that would make her so rich she can have all her worldly wishes. And so she pops the cork out of the top of the bottle, and as it pops out the top of that bottle, so she can hear a puff of air, almost like the pressure had been built up for so long. And then almost straight away afterwards, there was an almost fluorescent green mist or fog coming out of that bottle that seemed to be heavier than the air that was coming out of the bottle, bubbling thick clouds out of the bottle and beginning to fill the chamber that she was in. And as it filled the chamber she was in, so it was making it harder and harder to see. And she tried to keep looking around her while that chamber was filling more and more with that green fog, that green mist that was just glowing around her. And then as it cleared and started to dissipate, and and she started being able to see again. She found herself sat down in the most beautiful meadow, sat there in the most beautiful meadow on lush, long green grass. And she could see the most wonderful clouds in the sky, bubbling past. She could see trees in the distance. She could smell how fresh the air smelt here. And she wondered where here was, and she stood up. And she could see off in the distance was a lake, and a river leading away from that lake, weaving its way through the land. And near the lake was a small cabin. And she didn't know where here was, but she wondered if the answers are in the cabin. So she walked through the meadow towards that cabin. And as she walked, she paid attention to the sounds of the birds here and noticed they all sound different to what she's familiar with. She could see hedges and shrubs here, but they all looked different to what she's familiar with. They all had a familiar feeling, but they weren't ones that she knew. And as she walked past a hedge, she saw a little black fox cub tucked away sleeping, filling the whole space of that hedge, looking so peaceful, with the daintiest little snores as it breathed in and out while sleeping. And she watched the way its belly moved in and out. And while she was watching that, a black fox came over and looked up at her. And near that black fox were other fox cubs. And the black fox suddenly spoke and took her by surprise. It said, "He's such a hedgehog. He just finds a hedge, takes up all the room, and just slumps down and falls asleep." And she's confused by this talking fox. And she asks it, "Did you just talk?" And the fox says, "Of course I just talked. You just heard me and you're having a conversation with me." And she says, "Well, where am I then?" And the fox says, "You're here. Where do you think you are?" And she says, "Where's here?" And the fox says, "Well, here is here, where you are. Here is where you are." And the conversation goes around and around. And she asks for their names, asks, "Do you have a name?" And they share their names. And she finds it amusing that they've nicknamed the one asleep under the hedge Sloth, saying that he'll barely move for anyone. He just likes to rest and drift into dreams. And she asks who lives at the cabin. Is someone there? And the fox says, "Yes, who lives at the cabin is there." And she feels that everything from this fox just seems to be a little cryptic, and no straight answers. And she says, I'm going to go there now. And the fox says, yes, you go there now, because there is where you're supposed to be. Here is where you are now. And she looks quizzically and confused at the fox, as the fox seems to just smile back at her. And she continues her journey, walking to that cabin, wondering where this is, where she can encounter a talking fox. And at the cabin, she walks around and tries to peer in the windows, and she can't see anyone through the windows. She walks round to the main door, knocks on the main door, and doesn't seem to get an answer. So she knocks again, before saying hello while opening the door. And she walks into that cabin, and in front of the fire she can see a cat asleep on a velvet cushion. And while that black cat sleeps on the velvet cushion, she can hear it gently purring. And occasionally it seems to move its legs as if it's running in its sleep, before snuggling down a bit more and purring a bit deeper. And she looks around inside the cabin, and she can't see anyone here. And then when she turns back, she sees a man standing there, wearing a purple robe and a purple floppy hat. And the man takes that purple pointed floppy hat off, holds out his hand and introduces himself. And he says that he's the genie in this bottle. And she asks, what do you mean a genie in a bottle? What bottle? And he says, didn't you open the bottle and come in here? And she says, well, I opened the bottle, and then there was this green fog. And when the fog cleared, I was here, but I don't know where here is. And the genie says, here is where you are. Haven't you already been told that? And she says, yes, I was told by a fox that here is where I am, but I don't know where here is. And for a little while, the conversation seems to go around and around like it did with the fox. And she feels that maybe everyone here talks cryptically and in a bit of a confusing way. And she notices that above the fire on the fireplace is a green bottle like the one that she opened. And she says, I opened a bottle just like that before I appeared here. And he says, yes, that is here. And she realizes that she's inside the bottle, even though that seems incredibly unreal. And she can't understand how that could be possible. And the genie says, take a seat. And so she relaxes down into a seat, and just as she does, the strangest thing happens, that her movement of sitting onto the seat seems to make the seat emit a tune or a sound, almost like a voice. And as she moves, slightly startled, that makes a different sound, and so she rests her arms onto the arms of the chair, ready to stand up, and that makes it make two more sounds. And then when the genie sits down in the chair opposite, the same thing happens there. And he says, ignore the singing furniture. Every movement you make will make the furniture sing. And it will sing the song of your movement. And its song will match your movement. And it will sing any tension, and it will sing any relaxation. And so, if you take a moment to relax back in that chair, you'll notice the way that it sings softer, almost like it's massaging you with a deep, resonating voice. And she relaxes back in the chair as the voice sings in a resonating way that seems to resonate through her. And she takes a long out-breath, and as that leads to her body softening and relaxing, so the voices around her soften and relax and sing so gently, almost hypnotically, almost like surround sound singing. And she feels that with each breath, that singing softens through her body and relaxes her, until she begins to feel so relaxed, her body becomes so still, the singing softens to silence. And this genie is just sat there opposite, with a slight smile on their face, and comfort and kindness in their eyes, just matching the breathing of the woman sat there. And she notices out the corner of her eye the cat occasionally curling up a little bit more and keeping itself comfortable. And the woman starts to explain that she'd heard myths for years. She grew up on myths. And she tracked down a bottle. And she thought that in the bottle would perhaps be a treasure map or some guide to some treasure. Maybe even the treasure itself. But instead she's ended up here and she doesn't understand. And the genie explained that they are a genie, that they can issue wishes, but you've got to be really careful what you wish for. That wishing for the wrong things, or for the wrong reasons, can have unexpected consequences, and that you don't get anything for nothing, that for every action, something else will happen somewhere else, that everything has its consequences and you have to be aware of that. That as in life, nothing appears from nowhere. So if you suddenly had lots of money, someone somewhere, or money somewhere, has to have transferred to you. And there are risks in where that could have come from. And so the woman asks, why would anyone ever make a wish when they have to give it so much thought And the genie explained that so many people only think about themselves. They think about what it is that they want. They don't think about the consequences of getting what they want. And that it takes a very special kind of person to be able to think about things in a way that benefit others, that have positive consequences for others, and that you have to be very specific to do that. And the genie explained that throughout history they've been seen as good, they've been seen as bad. Some people have made wishes that have turned out really bad for them, and then they've blamed the genie, saying it's the genie's fault, the genie's evil, the genie's bad because this bad thing happened, when they were the ones who wished for it. The genie was indifferent and was just granting the wish, and how it happens to be the easiest way it can happen. That as most things in life, the easiest solution is normally the one that occurs. And the woman understood the idea and wondered. She'd spent a lifetime dreaming of being able to get whatever she wants, being able to have the life she wants. And the genie asks her, do you not have the life you want now? And she gives it some thought and doesn't answer right away. And the genie says, do you not like your current life? And she carries on thinking, and then concludes that she enjoyed waking up in such a comfortable bed. She enjoyed going on this treasure hunt. In fact, she realized she's enjoyed many things that have happened through her life without having any treasure, without having any riches. She's enjoyed her journey so far. And the genie said that the important thing is the journey, and is focusing on the enjoyment of that journey, on the ups and downs, on how you've got through tough times that you can look back on proudly, that you can talk with others fondly about or proudly about your successes at overcoming adversity and challenges, of pleasurable experiences. That the destination is the end of the road. And where do you go when you reach the end of the road? Why would you want to rush that? And you can have 3 wishes. You just need to be aware that you'll be rushing to the end of the road. And do you really want to be there yet, when you've got so much journey ahead of you? And the woman gives it some thought and asks, are you happy? And the genie says that they live each day for the day. They explain that they go out fishing in the lake every day. They eat their fish for tea every night. They go for walks. They talk with the animals. They enjoy living in such a magical land that it would be nice to get out of here from time to time but they enjoy being here. And she asks how she gets out of here. And they say, when you make a wish, you go back out of the bottle. And then you can seal the bottle. And when you want to make another wish, you open that bottle. You come back in here again. You make a wish, and you go out of the bottle to the life with that wish. And then you seal the bottle. And then when you want to make your third wish, you open the bottle. You come back in here, you make your third wish. And you leave again, and I never see you again. And you lead your life with your third wish. And she asks, how are wishes granted? Are you magic? And the genie says that it's not so much that they're magic. It's that this bottle is out of space and time. It's a land that's separate from all of space and time. And that they were the creator of space and time. And that every decision you've ever made, every alternative decision, was made in another universe. And every decision everyone has ever made, and everything that has ever happened, every alternative thing that's ever been made or decided or has happened, has also happened. And so, since the beginning of time, since the beginning of space, there's an infinite number of infinitely increasing universes. And all that happens is when you leave here, you land in a universe where all the decisions were made that led to the outcome that you desired, to the universe you wanted to be living in. And so you're no longer the you that's in the universe that you were in. You're now the you in this alternative universe. The one where different decisions were made on the way to that one moment. And it'll be the shortest number of decisions that were needed to make everything fall in place. Just like deciding to move a domino from one location to another so that a different path of dominoes falls down. And the path of dominoes that would have fallen down no longer does. And so she asks, is there a way out of here without having to make a wish? And if I don't use my 3 wishes, can someone else come here and make wishes instead? And the genie says no. Only one person at a time can make wishes. I don't grant wishes for anyone else, while I'm granting wishes for one person. They have to wait until that person has made all 3. And they said, well, what if that person isn't around to make all 3 wishes? And the genie said, then no one else gets to make any more wishes, because I've been unable to grant the 3 wishes for that person. And she thinks about this for a while, and thinks about what wishes she could ask to be granted. And while she thinks, the genie says, do you want to come outside, and we'll stand by the lake while I do some fishing for the evening? And so the genie goes outside fishing. And the woman asks, do you want to be able to come and go from here? And the genie says that no one's ever asked them that before. That it'd be nice to be able to travel into the universes rather than just remaining outside of the universes. She asked where the bottle came from, saying if you've been around that long, you can't have always been in a bottle. And the genie explains that the bottle is just a psychological representation, that people see what they expect to see, and it changes over time. And then as the sun sets, she joins the genie for food, and the cat eats some of the food politely on the floor. And the woman knows what wishes she wants to make. And she has to think about what potential consequences there could be from her decision. And so she says, I wish for you to be able to come and go from here as you please. And then a green mist forms around her, and as it clears, she finds herself sat back in that chamber with the bottle in front of her. She puts the cork back in the bottle. She waits a few moments to see if the genie appears at all. She doesn't see the genie at all. She removes that cork. The green mist appears again, filling the room. And as it clears, she finds herself back in that meadow. She walks back down to that cabin, sees the genie standing there. The genie thanks her and says how grateful he is. She asks what sort of changes have occurred. The genie said that for that, the only changes that needed to occur was a pathway, an ability for them to have their own way of moving in and out of this area and into the universes. And then the woman thinks about how she's going to phrase the next wish. And she wishes for the genie to be free to make their own decisions in life. And then she finds herself surrounded by that green mist again, and then back in the chamber. And then she seals that bottle and she places it back on the plinth. And she turns and walks away from that room. And just after she's walked through the door, she notices that the door is swinging shut. And she manages to get the key out of the door, and before it fully closes, she throws that key into the chamber, and the door shuts behind the key. And she finds her way back, down those corridors, up the stairs, down more corridors, up more stairs, until eventually she ascends the steps back up to the woodland. She puts her hand into the water. She finds that lever. She pulls on the handle, and then those stairs rise up again as the ground shakes and the mud vibrates and dances around. And once it's all stopped moving, she covers it all over, smooths down all of the mud and leaves to hide that anything ever happened here. And she notices that she must have been down there for a long time, because the sun had long set. It was now night time as she walked through the woods. And she found her way through those woods, out to a meadow, out of those woods. And she sat down in that meadow, under the moonlight. She was aware of the temperature dropping, and she wrapped herself up warm and tucked her hands into her coat. And she sat there wondering about the experience, wondering about the genie, wondering what had changed and whether there really were wishes, because nothing seemed any different. And as that moonlight shone across the meadow, she could notice the glistening, dancing of cobwebs on the grass, with damp dew caught in the webs like millions of diamonds across the meadow. And while she almost hypnotically watched the dancing, sparkling light across the meadow, she could hear footsteps coming along beside her, and she looked over and saw someone walking towards her, and then recognised the way they walked as it being the genie. And they sat down beside her, and they thanked her for allowing them to be free, to make their own choices, to lead the life they want. That now, if they spend a lot of their life in the bottle, that's their choice. But they can also choose to visit different universes. And they said they're still the same being, that they can take the form of the wind, they can take the form of different animals, they can take the form of the grass, of the sea, of a storm in the distance. With a thought, they can be on a different planet. They can access any of the infinite universes out there. That they can now explore all of this and gain much greater knowledge about the multiverse. That they remain eternal, that their journey ends when the universe ends, just as their journey began at the start of the universe. And they can be watching everywhere at once, or deciding to be nowhere. And that freedom is because of this woman. And the woman looked up and smiled. And then the genie reached into their pocket, and they took out of their pocket a small little treat. It looked just like a coin, and she took that coin and looked at it, and it was the size of a coin. It looked like a coin, but it was very different to any coin she knew. And the genie said, "This will keep you connected. Any time you want to talk anytime you want to explore other realms, explore other universes, carry on your treasure hunting and enjoying your journey, just hold that coin in your hand. Close your eyes and just communicate with me. Just ask for me and I'll be there. And then she noticed the little black cat's head pop up out of his top and meow a little bit as it looked over at her. And the genie said that his cat goes with him everywhere. They explore the multiverse together. And the cat then said thank you. The genie smiled. The woman looked down at that coin, and when she looked up again, he was gone. And there was just a slight breeze as she gazed out over all of the sparkling diamonds across the field, spread out through that meadow, the dancing light of the glistening dew. And after the experience that she'd had, she lay there, wrapped up warm, watching as the moon set and the sun rose, noticing the colours of the sky as that sun rises high, the freshness of the air with each breath that she takes, and feeling tired, she found her way back in the daylight to her hotel. And on arriving at the hotel, she went to her room briefly before going and having some breakfast, and then decided to sleep a little through the day. And then she had a day of just going out, looking at the sights, almost like a tourist for a day. And she spent another night in the hotel before heading home. And once home, regardless of how pleasant it was to sleep in the hotel, she loved the idea of going back to sleep in her own bed. And so, as bedtime approached, she went to her room. She got ready for bed. She put that coin down on the side. And she noticed that some of her jewellery, some of her necklaces, had got all tangled during her journey in her bag. And so she very carefully, with her fingernails, started undoing the knots in the necklaces, very carefully prizing them apart. And as she would get some parts opened up, she just hold it back with a finger, while she undoes another bit of the knot, which she'd hold back with another finger. And almost hypnotically and therapeutically, she'd find herself relaxing deeper and deeper while she undoes all the knots in her jewellery. She'd find something deeply satisfying about going through those necklaces and then being able to lay down a knot-free necklace on her dressing table, and then the next necklace, laying down another knot-free necklace, and then another knot-free necklace, before heading to bed, and relaxing down in that bed, and drifting and floating so peacefully, so comfortably asleep, knowing she's going to awaken in the morning, feeling alert and calm and comfortable, and set up ready for the day ahead, thinking about this new friend she's made, and the adventures she can potentially go on with the genie as she drifts and floats so comfortably, so relaxed, asleep